Elixir Mob.
This is
Elixir Mob.
Elixir Mob 71. You were there at the beginning, weren't you?
I was. I was. Yeah, and to reflect, yeah, we started the Elixir Mob going through Stephen Grider's very good Elixir and Phoenix One bootcamp course, and we worked all the way through that, and we did Elixir stuff, which is some very interesting little Elixir. What are they even called? Like little apps, and then moved on to like building a Phoenix system and a chat system and so on. That was awesome. And then we, like, having got to the end of that, we moved. Did we start first going through these books to do with like the Phoenix? I forget the name of the author, but yeah, we got all these books and started working through those PDFs and building like a sort of an e-commerce site. And it got to the point where I felt like, we're recovering a lot of the same ground. And we ended up creating the Paranauts site. And there was a period where it was mainly just Ryder and myself in the Elixir Mob. And yeah, so we kind of built, a system which we got working. And that got to the point where the real block on it was not the Elixir Phoenix stuff, which was all working fine. But in order for the whole shaboodle to work properly, we need this, like a kind of video conferencing system with an API that we can talk to. And so we gradually got sidetracked into that, and then so recently I think the Elixir Mob was rebooted with going back to working through those that textbook, which we could do if you were deeply excited about doing that today.
I mean, I think like, so I guess I when I started the Elixir Mob, we were doing Paranauts stuff, but then we were kind of where I got stuck on that was like in getting it to pass the CI. Like we didn't understand why it was passing locally, but it wasn't passing the CI. But then it seemed to not be passing your tests locally, maybe in the same way that it wasn't passing in CI. And we were joking about your old computer and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it did kind of feel like it was, like a less Elixir related and more like
it's more DevOps. Yeah, absolutely.
Which, I mean, you can't get away from DevOps, and if you want to use like these new, like CI and stuff. And I think like the book is really nice. Like I am excited about being able to have like an e-commerce site where like I have plans to like at some point steal that that idea. Not that that was created by the author of this book. By any stretch of the imagination, like e-commerce sites are quite common. But I think
go on.
I think it would be nice to have that for my wife, for example, like to have her be able to put her milks online and people be able to like click through and buy them, and then like she just get like a text message or whatever saying like, hey, you have a new order, and she doesn't ever talk to anyone ever again. But I mean, I don't know, like this week I'm not so interested in doing like going through books on Elixir, because like even with my best efforts of trying to focus on the sprint, like it seems like I can get like 4 or 5 sessions per day of, and it takes longer to actually get something done. Like Michael and I were talking about it yesterday, that like we carried on the Rails 5 TDD mob was into being like more than 2 hours, and talking about how like in a 1 hour period of time it's like really difficult to get anything done.
Yes. I mean, I think 2 hours is kind of like seems to be sort of a key amount of time for getting certain things done. I mean, I guess it would be nice, since we're recording this, and other people maybe coming back and watching it, to have an Elixir flavor to what we're doing now. We were, and I forget exactly where, in the process of doing some doing some Rails thing for website 1, where we're starting to talk about design choices and about actually, I think it was actually for local support. It was actually the Charity Commission API, the design of that service for pulling in the data from the API. And I was starting to talk about state versus not state and so on. I wonder if it would be in what's the word? Is it educational, informative, instructional? I don't know if that's the right word. To bring up where the e-commerce site is, like the Elixir one, and look at that and compare and contrast some of the code to some of the code that we've got in local support website 1, and think about, you know, the alternatives there. I guess that, yes, it's still running all in C9, isn't it? There's a, and in fact, the reminder still says Paranauts. If we go back, there's that. Go back to the last Wednesday. We have the link to the
You want me
master.
to send you the link to the C9?
I have found it in the time that I was sort of like.
We, you know, not that it's makes any difference, but you were bringing that up when we were actually going through the Agile Dev Mob, which is Fridays at
yeah, I do, yeah.
UTC.
Like that's entirely possible that I yeah, my I mean, it's, there's a broader thing of like how you structure code that can be relevant here to like almost anything that we do. Yeah, and what we did now was we were looking at the Oracle of Bacon and the design of that code. Yeah, absolutely. So here we are with the app. I found, I thought that this you know, there's obviously a lot of work has gone into putting this textbook together, and it's got some things in it. I think that the flow of it is kind of odd. I mean, in terms of, you know, the what might be the sort of religious drive. You know, it's always an odd thing I find when the like it sort of skips and says like, do this, right? Because you needed that kind of boilerplate, and now we'll write the test and kind of blah, blah, blah. I don't know. There's I have some stylistic issues with it, but actually maybe are ones that, I mean, there's this big danger of kind of like casting aspersions on the other approaches, you know, and I don't know, there's this fear like, you know, these other approaches, are they not best practices? Are they the wrong ones? Or they lead to like, you know, awfulness? But actually, pretty much, I think almost whatever you do, you end up in DevOps hell anyway. So it's like, you know, be careful about, you know, screaming too loudly about wanting things this way or that way is the lesson that I'm kind of learning over the last few years. Is there a good way? Do you have the PDF of the book to hand? I
have it in the Dropbox.
I have it here actually myself. Yeah. Do you know what section you're up to?
We're in chapter 6. More specific than that, you'll have to give me a minute.
Sure. I'm just going to find. So, you're making the cart at the moment, is that right?
Yeah. So we created the fetch cart plug, and we have like if you run the test, we have like a failing. Well, we have a test that's actually, I think we actually got the test passing. Yeah, I think that was our big win last week with Ryder and Joseph. Cool. We also do have version control as well, which is cool. Yeah. And we're working on improving the Git commit messages so that you can actually tell what we did. Right.
And I guess, do I have to start? I have to. Oh, this is the thing, isn't it? I have to start the. I remember it was all coming screaming back to me. Yeah, we've got to start the Postgres service. And do we need the WebDriver running for the
Yeah, for the test.
Yeah.
For some of the tests.
And having done that, then I kind of need to be in a different window.
And you can start the server as well if you want to look at the actual.
Yeah. I do want to do that. And that is that mix Phoenix serve, isn't it?
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, or there's that IEX space -s, which will give you like an IEX section.
Yeah. I'm imagining we won't be.
I think it's it might. I think it's just PHX, and then
Anyway, yeah, all the tests are passing.
Yes.
Woo. Lovely and green. And then if I want to view this,
you can do Phoenix with all spelled out. All right. I always do PHX.
Yeah, this is a more long way. And now, is there kind of preview? Can I just click there to preview the running application? Oh, there we go. Yeah, and then I always want to like go out in a different window and open the app. And yeah, so there's the app. And so now, I guess if I'm signed in.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a sign in, but
then I might be able to see the cart. know, yeah, it's a long time since like my probably sensible to just register.
Residence. Very one.
Check the errors. I guess maybe the phone can't be blank.
100. I thought you were gonna do 555, or is that an American thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure about 555s. Oh yeah, I'm logged in. So yeah, so I can then add to cart, and then I guess at the moment yeah, anyway, presumably there's yeah, all good stuff. Yeah, so
you know, have you eaten jackfruit before?
I don't know that I have.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's from Brazil, but we have lots here in Brazil. I think it is from Brazil.
Right.
You can make like a meat substitute with it, like jaca, you know.
Cool.
Yeah.
Solid. Yeah, so we've got this. I mean, the interesting thing about the Phoenix Elixir at the moment is that they were in a very Rails-like structure, and they've kind of changed it around a bit. If we look at the most, is it page controllers? Probably, this is like our main indexing. So we've got controllers in the same way that we have controllers in Rails, and of course, controllers are not specific to Rails. I mean, there's this standard thing of the model view controller. And then we've got like, is it both templates and views?
Yeah.
And so we've got the templates there, and that's very similar to what we've got with the, nearly almost identical to the sort of ERB partials. Everything seems very similar there. And the views themselves seem closest to me to be like helper methods, really. I mean, I don't know if we can actually find any of these have got, yeah. So like I think that they're more than helpers in that actually they kind of actually end up instantiating the thing that the template goes there. Like in Rails, you can get away without a helper, but you have to have the view. But in terms of where you put pieces of code, like we would say, oh, that little Rails helper methods are going in there. So that's that all seems similar. And Dan is here. Hey, Dan. Or Daniel. Hey, Daniel. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm just gonna listen in because I don't have any idea about Elixir. But
okay. Well, actually, this is a good time because we were just reviewing. We're just going to do some rather than trying to push on with Elixir. We were going to be comparing and contrasting Elixir, Phoenix, and Rails. And you're familiar with Rails. Yeah. So we were just in the Elixir Mob recently. We've been building this e-commerce site for fruit. Following, this is all from a textbook that we have free access to as part of the premium mob. And I was just saying to Matt how we have a layout in places that's very familiar to the people who know Rails, in that we have controllers and we have templates. And then I was just talking about how we have, so I found this sort of slightly confusing. We've got templates and views. So sort of the things that we call views in Rails, and I guess maybe should I pull up which is the right thing to pull up at the moment. Yeah, I'm going to pull up website 1 just because it's a website 1 week.
Yes.
And so we should be like, there's website 1.
So, like, the thing is that like with the React mob, for example, there are ways that we could like use React and with the existing sites, but with the Elixir Phoenix, there's not really a way that you can incorporate into it.
Yes and no. I mean, to the extent that website 1 was microservices, it would be relatively easy to build back-end components, like replace them with Phoenix microservices. I mean, as it happens, the one node microservice service that we did have for website 1, which was the Agile bot, did not seem to me to be offering any additional value by being a microservice, other than saying, oh, we have a node microservice. I mean, if that's an advertising thing, fantastic, we have a node microservice. But it basically was making it just like incredibly difficult, or just more difficult to debug, you know, and like testing it was a huge pain doing it in that node stack. And it was like this old, it was in CoffeeScript and old and stuff, whatever. And we spent hours like wrapping tests around it, getting these things sorted out. And I was just like, this would take me 15 minutes in Ruby and RSpec. And Michael was like, oh yeah, you say that, but you know, like you don't know and stuff and whatever. And one time I was like so sick of him saying that, I just like, you know, I just took like, it took me like an hour instead of 15 minutes. But like while I wasn't looking, and I just redid the whole thing in Ruby and RSpec. And that is actually, you know, code that we now have. So it got absorbed back into website one. But I like the idea of the microservices in the idea that if website one, if it was a microservice that was managing the events, and there was a microservice that was managing the users, and there was a microservice that was managing the projects, and they had clear APIs between the front end and the back end, then you know we wouldn't care what each of the individual microservices was implemented in, because they would be using the API. So I mean, it's not like if we go along the path whereby we create a React front end for website one and it's talking to a Rails API, you know, ultimately parts of that Rails API could be replaced by Phoenix APIs.
Yeah.
I guess your point is that more with React is in principle you could have React sprinkles. You know, you can sort of do that like in an existing Rails monolith. However, and I've got that to work in website one, but got completely stuck. Like, just couldn't get it to work with our testing environment. I mean, maybe now having got rid of WebKit and moving to other ones, and I mean, you know, it's like, I don't know, it's one of those things where, like, and Michael was then again, it's like, well, you didn't really try to get the web testing working. And I was like, no, I spent like 5 hours to get the testing working, and it just didn't work. And I tried 3 different React Rails gems and it didn't work. He's like, yeah, but you're not that clever. You don't really know what you're doing. You know, other people could do it really easily. And you know, yeah. So you get a bit of a snapshot of Michael's and my relationship over the last 5 years through those little.
Is there I guess like maybe you're going to get on to this later in the mob, so I don't want to spoil things, but is there any, like, the way you understand like Elixir and Phoenix, would there be any, like, because I'm thinking about that issue that we have with events that would be nice to come up with a solution for.
So that the issue that we have with events, can you elaborate on the I mean, there's so many different issues that we have with events. Which one were you particularly
just like the whole thing, you know, like it's, you know, the fact
that it's slow, that
yeah,
it's a performance issue.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that potentially Phoenix would help with that, but I think again the real problem there, I think, or at least my current working hypothesis is that the problem is that at the moment website one is doing too many calculations in memory when it could be doing them and storing them in the database. And so you could produce both the same problem and the same solution with Phoenix, right? Mm-hmm. In that you could have Elixir code up front calculating based on all these recurrence rules when the events should be, and you could also have Phoenix, you know, doing that kind of offline, as it were, or not when the person just wants to do the events, and storing that in the database. So those are, it's interesting how that's, you know, kind of cross-cutting, as it were. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like not to. I mean, I don't know about what Phoenix provides, but I know that like newer versions of Rails, I've heard that they like have stepped up their caching. So
right, yeah, no, and that's, I mean, you know, that's a whole nother thing there, which is like, actually maybe we don't need to re-architecture the thing, but you know, effective use of caching might allow us to get round the problem. Although, as you may have heard, the 2 most complicated things in computer science are naming things and cache invalidation. So it's, you know, I mean, at the moment, the idea that the you know, we store the kind of events recurring up to a horizon in the database seems cleaner to me. It seems like we avoid that, you know, has the cache been validated, is it not validated, is it going to be fast sometimes or not others, but, you know, I mean, that's but yeah, so event performance thing, I mean, that's a whole nother can of things. I guess maybe let's, for the time being, continue in our comparison between Rails and Phoenix. So we've got all of our controllers, what's like static pages equivalent thing, static pages controller there. Let's go back to here. Yeah, so we've got the view, what we call views in Rails, which the views folder that we get basically only it will only contain these what to Phoenix One people are templates. So that's, you know, a source of confusion. Like if I'm working in Phoenix, I keep calling these templates views and the views helpers and so on. So I was just saying before you joined, Daniel, that the views in Phoenix basically seem to hold little helper methods that are used in the templates. So they're the seeming equivalent of the Rails helpers, although I think the way Rails helpers work is that they kind of get mixed in with, like they're using this module pattern and they get mixed in with, I guess, is it, yeah, with the template, whereas the way, I think views have a potentially more complex operation in, what are they even called here? In Phoenix 1, does it refer to the view there? It doesn't. Use Mango Web Controller, alias Mango Catalog. It's doing render. I mean, we're simply referring to the template there in the same way that we refer to the view in Rails. Do we look at the routing system? We've got, so you know, this is the equivalent to the routes.rb in Rails, and you know that, like, so we're connecting up. We've got the page controller there is connected. The index method maps to here. You know, this is a long-winded. You can like collapse this down in the same way that you can do like resource routing in Rails. And we're piping through. We've got this pipeline. The browser accepts fetch session. Like, none of those are
different, you know.
Say again.
These plugs are different than in Rails.
Yes. Now that's one of the interesting things that Elixir exposes that Rails doesn't automatically, is the idea of these pipelines and you having some control of the sequence of things that it goes through. And
well,
this is
like in Node.js, yes, in Express.
Yes, maybe so. Maybe so. I'm not familiar. I don't use Express enough to say for certain, but yes, very possibly.
You can build there how this request comes to you through different functions, and then you can get it. You can modify it.
Right. And Node is at a much lower. It certainly makes sense. I mean, Node and Express are kind of at the lower level where you need to build those things, and Rails is this more what's the word? Smothering, empowering. What's the right word there? Framework that says, oh yes, this is the way that everything's going to happen. You know, and so, but I think the interesting thing in particular here is the idea that Elixir and Phoenix don't have any state. So there's this kind of none of these things have any state. In principle, with Express and with Node, you could give the individual things state that they would have and would, like, you know, could change, and then the behavior of the pipeline would be a function of that. But for all of these, each of them is kind of receiving like the entire connection object, which I argue acts like state. But it's sort of like the way Phoenix is working is it's saying, okay, none of the individual components can have any state, but we're going to have this one big global state that's got everything in it about the, you know, the state of the interaction with the user, and that passes through everything, if that makes sense.
Is that like the connection?
Yeah, I think it is.
There's like these, we've been coming up with these like really interesting errors about like must receive a con and return a con, you know?
Yes, exactly. So you've got this, this con here. So the fascinating thing here to me is to compare this with the code in our controller in, like, if we look at the static pages controller in website 1. So I guess we don't actually have an index there, but well, let's go to one that has an index. Let's go to like users controller probably has an index. I expect something. Yeah, there you go. But so this is your common pattern in Rails controllers, is that you'll have the controller, and you'll have these actions that the controllers expose. And we have exactly the same sorts of actions exposed by controllers in Phoenix, right? Like, here we go. Right, yeah, page controller, index. There you go. Now, we know that we have access to params in Rails, right? And it's just sort of there. Fantastic. It's like, this is in principle a local state to this current user's controller that we can refer to inside all of these different actions, right? The params is there. Now, that's anathema to Phoenix, which says you can't have any state. So it has to be passed in as a argument. It then becomes effectively local state to the, when you're in the context of this action, this method. But yeah, there it comes there. And similarly, like all the connection state, which is like, what was all these different things, like when you are they, it's all the stuff that was, I guess they're technically in the params, it's all the stuff from the headers, but it's then like all of the intermediate calculations, like of coming through this pipeline and everything that's been done, all gets stored in the connection. So to know, where you are in the sequence of all of this, that, and the other. In principle, all of that's available in the controllers in Rails, but it doesn't come in here. It's sort of state. Like in Rails, the user's controller gets instantiated. When it gets instantiated, we don't see the initialization method, but when it gets instantiated, it gets given all of this state that it can do what it wants with. And that's this idea of encapsulation, is that we're not seeing all of that stuff going on behind the scenes. That's all state that's kind of the user's controller object has got, and that we will only be able to refer to in the ways that the user's controller interface allows us to interact with, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas here, we've now got the connection, and we can dump the entire thing, and we could, go in and say, right, connection, what have you, like, really important thing that breaks. And we could go and change it, like really important thing, and set that to banana, and like, can you see how in Phoenix, we've basically kind of we've said, look, we're going to pass around the global state object. And as a result, it means that all of the individual entities that are interacting with it have quite a lot of power over it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're tying that into the conversation we were having about encapsulation and being able to,
right?
Like, so the Elixir doesn't have encapsulation.
The Elixir does not have encapsulation in the same way. I mean, the closest it has is compartmentalization, in that the connection object is then divided up into. I mean, that would be sort of interesting there. I mean, can we even see the connection object there? But if I forget what the logging statements are. What if I wanted to dump the connection object here?
Like, we have in the cart controller, we have like we have some stuff where we interact with the connection, and like, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, there's like, because here the cart becomes stuff that we do. I would just did I change something in there? What did I change in there? Ooh. Why that was, I accidentally controlled it. But yeah, it would be nice. I forget now. It's been a while since I've been doing this. Can I do find search in this folder? Is it print? No. Oh, maybe it is. Oh, it's just being very slow. Console log. That's all. Then you end up with all the JavaScript. Yeah, I can't remember that. Oh, I'll just do Elixir. Oh gosh, what's the Elixir logging method? Oh, Elixir Phoenix logging. How to log something in control when Phoenix server is running. Oh, there's like require logger and then logger info. That's always the thing about using loggers is that it, you then end up spending, like, is it not showing because the logger's not working, or I've put it at the wrong setting level, or what, or this and the other. I mean, I guess here that should be the pages controller there. And then if I go back to wherever it is, we've got the server running. It's not there. That looks like that. There's that one. Oh, here we go. Okay, yeah. String char's not. It looks well. Anyway, it looks like I've at least broken it, but we can see there we've got plug con, and then we can see the whole the connection, which includes the cart. And sort of according to Phoenix, it says, well, you know, if you're going to be putting like extra variables in there, stick it in the assigns section, and then we can go on and it says like cookies. And then we can say, like, this is the Phoenix controller that we're in, and the layout that we're using, and the layout then that's got the view in it as well, which pipeline we're in, yeah, all of that stuff. So yeah, we can sort of it's this whole blob of stuff is being passed in and out, which is it's very similar actually to the way in which Python, which wasn't, I don't think it was originally object oriented, implements object orientism, is just by having these like if you've got an object oriented, like if you look at a Python class, it has, I wonder if it's going to have see an example of it. Can we see one? Here we go. Yeah, like in a Python class, every function has a self passed into it. I think if we go on, I'm just going to do more complicated ones. They're all just simple ones. Like, yeah, def, description, self. Right? And so the funny thing is that, like...
Hello?
Daniel's going to take the phone call, so I'm just going to mute him. The funny thing is like, that kind of global object is there, hidden there in Rails and in Ruby. Right, and when we see in Python, there it is sort of poking through. Now in Python, we are allowed state, and you know this self thing then is a reference to that chunk of memory associated with the object instantiated of this kind of class. And given we set kind of various possible instance variables, I mean, this should be, I don't know if you spend any time doing Python, but Python's very, very similar to Ruby. Right, so you can look at this and sort of see what's going on. Right, this is you've got a class and it's got some instance variables, and then you can refer to those instance variables. But so
instance or local? Sorry.
These are instance variables.
Okay.
That so when we create like here they've got. I think this presumes that car1 has been instantiated with a new method that would call initialize. I mean that's slightly the terminology is slightly different in Python, but so having you've got this sort of class which is your like prototype thing, and then you create an instance of one of those, and then these are instance variables for that. And it looks like self is just this kind of like, oh, it's an argument that you pass in, but you notice here in the code it calls description, but it doesn't pass in the variable. And what's happening under the hood in Python is it's basically saying, okay, whenever you call a method on the object, take that object and make it the first argument to the method call. So it's I don't know. I'm busy laboring away at the sun.
I mean, that's similar to like Ruby, and like you can use, if you call like a method in the model, like a class method, it has like, well, I guess that's not in the instance though. It's of the class. But then it has stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, what it is that like all of this stuff is kind of like syntactic sugar, because underneath all of this stuff has to be implemented by the same. The computers are not different when they run all these different kinds of things. And it's like if we've got in like Ruby, we've got like a class, let's just call it me, like that, and then I might have like a class method that I call on it. Like so, what that ultimately is it's basically sending a message, right? And so in this case, I'm sending the message, sends message hello to the thing that's me, right? But if I then instantiate it like me new like that, and then I do me, and let's say I do goodbye, then that's sends the message goodbye to the thing me, right? And both, like, it's referring to the specific instance, and in this case, it's referring to the class. And in Python, it ends up being like, the thing that gets passed into the method actually is the thing that you're referring to, so that it knows what state it can be manipulated and so on. Anyway. But yeah, but what's interesting to me then is like, Phoenix actually allows us to do everything that Rails does, but without using the sort of individual class states, without any instance variables, which begs the question, do we need instance variables? Are they actually just getting in the way of us in Rails? And the funny thing is that then we actually have this choice about how we design our objects in Rails and in Ruby, about whether they will have or won't have state. Like we could just like, create like functions and just do kind of functional programs where you've got like collections of functions assembled into modules, which is sort of what we have in Phoenix, if you know what I mean. I mean, the other the previous versions of Phoenix were more similar in that they just had models. They've now got this, I don't know, I've found the terminology that they're using now makes it really confusing for me. I forget what it is now, but these things here, like what they've got they call them, they're kind of schemas. They've kind of ended up, so these things like catalog here is a schema, I think. I don't know, I got confused. I got really confused here, because for me, the schema is like this term that refers to your entire database design. It's like the current state of like all the tables and columns and so on, whatever. And they've taken that word and they're using it to be like a schema is what I would call the model. But they're now saying, no, we don't have any models. We don't have any models. And then Federico and I got into a big, like, sort of hoo-ha about this. Like, they shouldn't be called models. And I was just like, Federico pointed to me to the creator of Phoenix talking about why they'd moved to this. And the main thing seemed to be, oh no, if we have this one models file, that folder that has all of the models in it, then it's confusing. You need to be able to break it up. But I'm like, okay, break it up. You don't have to stop calling them models. The problem wasn't that they were called models. It was that you had no way of dividing them up. But anyway, I mean, but there's Bob Martin says, Rails is busy being a very, it's telling you the most at the top level. If you look at the folder layouts, all of the names of the folders represent Rails concepts. They're not telling you about the business logic or the domain entities that are going on. And he argues that the domain entities should have priority. So it's a point of view. So interestingly here now, when you get to this lib Mango, so we separated Mango and Mango Web, within Mango, the layout of the folders is actually a bit like what Bob Martin is arguing for, which is that they're, you're showing us the domain entities that are important to the business logic. And then we have, the Mango Web, where actually this is still more Rails-like in that the names of the folders are related to the architecture. And, like wars are fought over much less in the software world about these different things. But yeah, that's kind of a big difference there in Rails. So the Rails, we still have the models folder, and we have our domain entities in here, which should in some way reflect, the business logic that's going on. And over here now, yeah, so we have these kind of catalogs, and then can I even like work out? So what do we have? We have repo here, application, like, so if I want to see what the database structure of something like a product is, yeah, okay, so there that says the word schema, right? Yeah. So here, this is the kind of thing that we might see in a Rails migration or the schema.rb file. In fact, we still can't get away from, where is it? I can't even remember what they are. We also have migrations. So we've kind of got this is not fantastically dry, but so we've got the creating the table, right? And then we've got the product schema. We see there? Dun, dun. So that's kind of, that's sort of an interesting thing in that
it's like breaking up the schema into various different parts that are stored separately. Whereas like in Rails, you have a schema that has the table products and then shows you what's in that, and you can go to one location and see all of the
yeah, they're definitely broken up. And also it's the case that in Rails, you have your migration and then the schema file is generated automatically. Whereas here we've got our migration, but I think you have to write the this what they call what Phoenix called schema, and here these are in Elixir terms rather than in database terms. I'm not even sure if that's entirely true, but there's yeah, like there are sort of subtle differences in the way that the migration needs to be written, I think, in the way that the schema needs to be written. But so then we've got our this is a schema there, and then if we go back to the lib, so that's the product, and then we've got catalog. But yeah, so we have, so the interesting thing here is we've got this division between, like in a Rails model, this information would be sort of hidden. I mean, people have written things to allow your Rails models to be annotated with this information. I think often people coming to Rails for the first time, they're like, how can I call price on the products? We don't, because it's not visible there, right? If we look at the sort of models just from a thing here, plan, and it's like, okay, it's got a free trial. What other methods can I call on plan? I've no idea. I would have to go and find the schema to find that. There are gems that will auto annotate that stuff for you. I mean, interestingly here, this is now split up into, we've got product, there's product factory, which will generate these things for us. Maybe that should be in a testing environment, who knows? And the catalog here is then, so you can sort of see here, like look, list of, so this is assuming that we've got, this is now like in Rails, this will be calling a, in Rails, the equivalent thing here would be you do product.all, right? Which arguably is kind of like a little bit cleaner. But here, of course, we've hidden this underneath this method to say it's list products, so you don't have to worry about what's going on here. So it's an interesting, different set of design choices. And I think overall, one of the big advantages that we're supposed to get from Phoenix is that because there's no use of instance variables generally, then there's kind of less to go wrong, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What do you mean by going wrong with instance variables?
Well, so I mean, this is I guess both the advantage and disadvantage of encapsulation is that, having encapsulated things, you're sort of trusting all of the other folks around you to do the right stuff. So in principle, being able to track down what's going wrong with the user's controller is potentially quite hard because, the request will come in and the user's controller will be instantiated. And then over time, different bits of state are going to change on it, right? And then it's going to, who knows, like partly because it's encapsulated, different things that are interacting with it. Why did that all fall apart? We're not just sure. It just kind of went bang. Whereas in the Phoenix setup, we've always got access to the entire state of the whole system. It's not hidden in quite that way. I mean, probably a very experienced Rails developer can pin down a problem quite quickly. I think the idea is though that effectively the Phoenix is non-blocking in that, in Rails, because different objects have different state, they can kind of get locked on one of them waiting for another thing to be available. Whereas in Phoenix, you've just got this kind of, you've got this huge connection object that's just being passed backwards and forwards. And so you can't encounter the same sort of lock problems. I'm not really convincing myself completely there, but Phoenix is then, that's the big pitch for it, is like, oh, if you've got like 100,000 chat connections coming in, they're very lightweight because, you've got this one, what in C we would call sort of a struct. It's just a data object, right? And the data object's there and it kind of goes through. Whereas, in a complex system like Rails, and it's all over plums, every different stakeholder who's created their own class and whatever is busy managing and manipulating their own state in like sort of precise, in slightly different ways. The argument, then this is where the functional like Haskell and everything is they're saying the great thing about functional programming, and this is functional programming, because basically the index method will do exactly the same thing as long as the incoming parameters are the same, right? It'll do, there's no depending upon the state that the page controller object was in, because there is no page controller objects. The page controller here is just a collection of methods that can manipulate these kind of global state objects. So in principle, it's more predictable exactly what they'll do. Conversely here, when you call the index method on the user's controller, well, who knows? It's going to depend obviously on the incoming parameters, but also on what's the state of the user controller. I mean, has the user controller been re-entered like 3 times and some various bits of information set that we can't actually see from the perspective of us writing this code to go in here? There's a lot more question marks over it.
Yeah. After Scrum.
Or just I was doing like this Japanese dance.
It's very similar to the after Scrum dance.
Well, the after Scrum is more. It's more like a full arm movement. This is a sort of a bon, Japanese dance. But anyway, I'm busy chatting away. I'm not sure if it's making huge amounts of sense. I have lots of.
I mean, a little bit. It's one of those things that maybe later on I'll be like,
yeah,
what he was on about. Because I would have thought it would have been the opposite, because you were busy talking about, like last time we were talking about encapsulation, you were talking about how that when there's no encapsulation, you can just change it. Like you just did there, you took the con and you something that will break, and then you changed it to banana. And it's like, well, if it's so easy to change something like that, you would think that that it would be, that it would cause more issues with people that maybe don't know what they're doing, changing things and causing issues. But then it seems like you said now that because the encapsulation, like you have this pages controller. I guess I guess I hadn't really thought about that the user's controller is an object that gets instantiated, like and I wouldn't. I don't know. I guess I don't. Maybe I do know how to change the state of that, and I just haven't made that connection. But
yeah, I mean, usually you won't be changing the state of it so much. Although if we get back here, basically every time we do this, right, we are changing the state.
Yeah, because these are kind of attributes of the instance of the user's controller.
These are instance variables of user's controller, and then through the magic of Rails, all of those instance variables are going to be available when we render the template, the view, right? If you look here, like there's very explicit control over saying, okay, there's no instance variable, right? We can't make one. The framework doesn't allow us to. What we do is we grab the item and then we explicitly say, I want this variable to be available locally when I'm rendering this template. And so it's I
mean, that's similar to like that. Looks like that syntax there looks like what I would do if I was like rendering a partial.
Exactly.
And I would ask like the project that I'm iterating through for it to be
exactly. And so that's it is exactly what it is. And so it's sort of, I mean, the funny thing is I think, like we're saying, like we could like go in and sort of break things on the connection. At least in Phoenix, if you're doing that, it's going to be, the data is transparent. You can dump all of it easily in one form, and it's in one place. I mean, partly, why would people want to do that? I mean, I guess as this, effectively this global state, this data struct, this connection gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more complex, then understanding like sort of interactions between the different pieces of it gets harder. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if Phoenix grows to the scale that Rails does. I mean, Rails, like, you might think website 1 is complicated, but they're a much, much bigger Rails systems, and there's these like Rails engines that do like, I mean, there are like huge systems like with like 100 times the amount of code than we've got the website one that like plug in all these different engines and so on. There's a whole ecosystem of things that you can do on top of Rails, and that will be the interesting comparison, is when Phoenix is at that scale and it's got all of these different interacting plugins, and there's like plugins managing other plugins and all these different things, like beyond what we have here. Will that be easier to manage and understand than Rails? And even then, it's going to be difficult. So you need to look at Rails now compared to where Phoenix is in 5 years. It's I think it's really tricky to know. I guess I'm just trying to. It's sort of moving towards time to wrap up. I wonder if we could bring it back to some of the specific stuff we're trying to build recently in Rails. So I mean, what were we just working on?
We were services yesterday.
So we were looking at what's the? Let me see if I can find
service.
Here. There's controllers, models. There's the services. Which is the service that we were
service?
We were working on. Oh yeah, so we've got the Slack service. Yeah, and so this is an interesting thing here in that we've got the Slack service is set up here as a module that extends self.
Mm-hmm.
Then what that means is that basically every single method in here is going to be a class method. So what that means is, and actually the way we're using it, there's no state. So you can see this actually as this, we're using a functional programming pattern here. Like for any of these methods to do anything, they're relying completely on the state that's being passed in through the arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using here a functional programming pattern. An alternative would be is that we would have to initialize the Slack service, and then we'd have a setup where we initialize the Slack service and set some instance variables. Like we could pass in the Slack client and the Gitter client, and they would be instance variables of the Slack service we're to use. And you can see how we've only got one method there that uses them. I mean, it's this whole question about when to dry out. So we've got I thought it's only passed in at one point in this, in which case there's not. I thought we had like post hangout notification and post YT. Yeah, so actually you can see here we've got there, right? So the pattern that we saw the other day in local support. I wonder if I can find the local support quickly to do this before we wrap up. Window local support, come here. Here we are. I don't know if we'll have that. But if we look at the services in here, and we can find, so the one this as an alternative. In this case, this service is a class, and we instantiate it with the things some information that it needs, and also like the third-party things that it's going to be communicating with. We set it up actually so that we don't, we actually hide this, so we prevent anybody outside initializing it, right? Because this is in the private, and we basically provide what would be called as a design pattern, a factory method here to create it. But what that means is now for the methods, we don't have to keep passing that through. So you can see how, like having initialized it and setting these things as states, now we can call run on this without having to pass any methods. But if we compare it with here, you'll notice that the way this is set up, because there's no instance variables, we have to keep on passing through the references to the client.
Send notifications on line 18.
Yeah, we have to keep passing through. So it makes the whole file busier. And so we then have this sort of question of, well, do we dry out such that we don't have so much message passing? Or do we keep with the more functional programming style, which sort of ensures that when we call any methods, that if it has the same input, it will have the same output. So that's great for predictability, right?
Yeah, so like when we call this post hangout notification, we're passing in different information than when we call the YouTube, the YT link, whatever. The post.
We are, although effectively it's sort of the same. in as much as it just so happens that we never post the YT links to the Gitter, so it doesn't need the Gitter client. But we could.
Well, I think that it's. I mean, I could be wrong, and this is something I'm waiting for a PR review on. But it seems like to me that like when we call this post YouTube link, that it has like a YouTube ID, which when we call that post Hangout link, it doesn't. There's like the YouTube ID is nil.
Maybe so. I mean, that may be a function of the tests, or
so the Hangout, like I think the Hangout object, or no, I don't know if it's
conceivably there may be all sorts of crazy things going on there, and that's something we can get into in the next sprinty thing. But yeah, I mean, the more the point here is we've got repetition in that, you know, Hangout and Slack client are both things that are going in there, and rather than having them both passed in both times, we've got the option of doing this kind of pattern. The interesting thing here is you can say, like, well, some people say, like, we'll state it's bad. In this case, by hiding the initialization method, we're basically making this, we're kind of using the language features here just to sort of dry out the method calls. Do you know what I mean? So like now, because of this, because when we call this with this set of properties, it's going to do exactly the same thing, assuming that the other third-party items that it interacts with on the network are the same, because actually you've used it once, it's generated an instance, and it's run and it's returned. If we call it again, it will generate a new instance. So you could argue that this is we're getting the benefit of the kind of cleaner code from not having to pass all the methods, the variables backwards and forwards, but we're also making it so that it always does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite a, you know, this is a, you know, quite a complicated layout. Is that then less beginner friendly than the perhaps simpler layout, which is just having this where you have all the stuff passed backwards and forwards? But interesting to note that in Phoenix we don't have the choice to dry out like that. I mean, in Phoenix, the only thing to do would be to start taking these things that we're passing in and making them into compound data structures, so that we could, like, and that's effectively what's happened here with the con objects in the controller, is that we have one very large compound object. So, you know, so that we don't have like 50 different things that we have to pass into the parts in and out of all of these different pipelines. But yeah, so I think we're kind of, you know, we're mobbed out. That's our mob time. There was a bit of Elixir in there. There was a bit of Rails. There was a bit of website one.
A little Python as well.
Say again?
There was a little bit of Python as well.
A little bit of Python, you know, bonus.
Some talk about Node.js and Express.js.
Yes, indeed. Do you, like, looking at these two approaches side by side, do either of you have kind of like a visceral dislike for either of these approaches?
No, not visceral. No, like I think that I mean I like the learning about functional programming at the same time as, like, you know, really enjoying working, like, I guess Ruby and Rails is kind of my favorite. But like I like learning about the other approaches to doing the same thing, and I hadn't thought about it like that. Like I noticed that yesterday working on this module, writing the tests and stuff like this, that, you know, it was being passed in, and then when, you know, from each, you know, when we call the send notification, it passes in that information, and then actually send notification calls send Slack message, and that, like, well, actually, like, depends, but there's like sometimes where it calls like 4 different methods, and like you need to pass it in each time. But I hadn't thought about that in like I've also seen that code down left where where it's initialized and you call that run method, but I hadn't made that like that connection that it was being passed with it, and without explicitly needing to I guess like I like having cleaner code where you don't need to like repeat, like drier code where you don't need to pass things more, you know. And I don't know enough about like the benefits of one approach to the other to really comment on that, you know.
Daniel, did you have any questions or any thoughts on these different code styles?
I think the more functional style, which is Elixir, I think, it makes it easier for testing. You don't have to mock so much, I think, because you pass it to the function. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, like every function is relying upon incoming data in the right form. So there's like
this is like normal, you know. You just put it in the test, and
right.
I think it can make, you know, the testing easier.
Yeah. The testing results don't depend upon having set up a lot of state potentially. Yeah.
Although I feel like we were talking about, like yesterday when we were doing the Slack service spec, we were mocking but we were mocking things that are objects. So we weren't mocking like so that wouldn't be functional.
Well, I mean, the tests associated with the Slack service, I mean, the Slack service is a purely functional thing. It's a collection of things, of methods. It also has some, I guess it has some data constants in there. If we look at the Slack service spec, then so we are doing mocking of one kind or another, but we are creating mock entities that we pass in like through the functional method call. I mean, and then it's sort of more the kind of complexities of these mocks are a function of our overall design, in that the Slack service itself is working on potentially somewhat complicated objects. So there's just so many different dimensions along which all these different things can vary. I think that we could potentially clean up the Slack service to make both the test and the Slack service look a lot simpler by using this kind of model, because this model, it uses state under the hood, but it doesn't actually expose any of that to the user, in as much as every single call to this, the incoming requester is precisely specifying the state on which it's going to run. So it just there's the alternate approach where you wouldn't have made this private, and you could repeatedly call run on the same thing, right? That's the other approach. In this case, because we are basically concealing all of the state aspects, all of these things that we can only do in Ruby and we can't do in Elixir, we're concealing that all behind this factory method and making all of the internals private, so we can kind of get the best of both worlds. We can dry out the syntax, and we can also make the testing simple by making it explicit, what's being tested. By every time you test, you pass that stuff in through the method call.
So when you on line 7, when you say like send to run, what you're sending is the state.
So have you not encountered this .send thing in Ruby before?
I have, yeah.
But so if we have an object, I'll do it outside because it's not like, if we just, if we have an object and we do send run, like, oh gosh, like this, that is exactly equivalent to doing object.run.
Right. So why would we?
What's in some cases, like if we want to dynamically choose what we call, that's very handy. I don't know that we have to do it here. It might be, I mean, I notice here like Marowen wrote that. It could be that we replace that with run and it would do exactly the same thing. But so the thing that's sending so we've got these incoming arguments, which all of which have default values, it turns out. Those values are then passed to the initialize method via new. And so I mean, this is like another way of doing this is we could just put like obj equals that, and then we would do obj.run like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like we're creating an object that will have references to all of these internal things, and then we'll run it. And so we've
and then we'll instance and
yeah. And so I mean, the interesting thing, of course, here is because we're in Ruby, we can like these things themselves, like this volunteer up the all these, can have state. So like depending upon the way we write the objects and we write the individual methods could be like doing things and you know, using the state. So blah, blah, but it's sort of unfair. Maybe it makes it more difficult to debug. But yeah, and then it's off. But what it means is, at least for the person interacting with this object, they only ever get to call it once with this set of stuff, right? They can't call it again and again and again and like then fall foul of bits of state that are left over from previously. So I think that's our mob. Maybe in an hour or so there'll be time for another sprinting session, Matt?
I hope so.
Yeah, good stuff. Or even, well, I guess if Daniel might be interested in pairing with you now on some sprinting stuff.
I'm going to go eat breakfast. You know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no pressure. Breakfast is good. Most important meal of the day. Daniel, lovely to meet you. I think it's the first time in like a real hangout. Fantastic. Yeah, anything I can help you with at all quickly before we wrap up?
I don't know. We're going to have a sprint on website 1?
We are. I'll certainly be available in about an hour. Once I'm going to have my lunch. And in about an hour, we'll be sprinting on website 1. You're all set up with the code base, are you?
Yeah. I will join you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
All right.
Nice one.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.